Hello, everybody. My name is Jeremy Francesi, and you are listening to First Floor Conversations, where the view at the top is only as good as the foundation which preserves it. Today on episode 66, we're joined by Austin Kodra. Austin's the head of community at Fritz Ai, a Boston-based machine learning startup, which has gained tremendous traction, including the recent Series A, really due to their innovative machine learning platform and their technology that helps our mobile apps see, hear, sense, and think all on their own. So today we're talking machine learning, we're talking community, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. But Austin, welcome to the show. How are we doing?
Thanks so much for having me, Jeremy. I'm doing pretty well. Things are moving right along at Fritz, and feeling good about some of the different products we have ongoing, some of the different avenues. We're trying to build community and maintain community. We've been doing it for a few years now, so we have some good things already in the bag, so to speak. But then we're always building more. So bigger, more diverse community, things like that. So excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, love it. No, appreciate you carving out some time. I mean, when we first connected, it was something, and we'll touch on it, we'll dive in. But when we first connected, it was through LinkedIn, through a friend of mine and a mutual colleague, will say. So shout out Marcus if you're listening. Guys, everybody that's listening, whether you're on the video or you're on the audio side, thank you for tuning in. Been a cool ride the last couple months, and you're going to start to see some shifts on my end and just different guests. And back to the core focus is, let's keep learning. When it comes to building a good foundation, whether that's relationships, it's a business model, we have to look at the foundation of it so that however high or large or big we want to go, we know that it can stand the test of time and the test of adversity. And when you guys think about community, I think every business, every organization, I don't care if you're for-profit or nonprofit, you have a goal of building a community of people that love the mission, that love the vision, that buy into the same culture. And that doesn't mean that they're locked arms physically in an office. They could be across the globe, but they buy into the same vision. And so we're going to talk about a bunch of different things. But I do want to start off on the basics and understand a little bit about you to set the stage. So with that in mind, let's even carve out, stepping away from Fritz machine learning and business. Where are you from, Austin? What's home for you?
So I would say home for me is in East Tennessee, so Knoxville, Tennessee, in the Smoky Mountains kind of area. I grew up there from about middle school, 7th grade, through undergraduate college, and spent a little time in grad school there as well. So that's where I'm from. I think as home. My folks are still there. My family. I was born in upstate New York, moved to West Texas. So I've kind of been all over. And now I'm up in Boston, or the Boston area, Cambridge specifically. But I'm from Tennessee, East Tennessee.
I always find it's the folks that travel the most are the most, I don't want to say community focused, but it's people that are so used to moving around that are more attentive to how to bring people together. What drove, I'm curious, what drove them moving around? Was it military family, or was it just college and studies? And
it's kind of funny. I was actually talking about this with a friend of mine, how, initially this was probably back in the early to mid 90s, my folks wanted to move from way upstate New York near the Canadian border, and they wanted to find somewhere that was hot and dry. They were sick of the climate mostly. My mom was a teacher at the time. My dad had just retired, so they had some flexibility in terms of where they wanted to go. So they kind of it was almost like they closed their eyes, pointed to a map in the West Texas desert. They used one of those old atlases where you looked up cities and it was like a profile. It was before, you had the broad access to the internet and all these different sort of ranking sites. So they were just like, this looks good. And then we, went and visited there. And then we sort of split the difference with Tennessee. They wanted just to, as we were growing up, to be in a place with a state school, which Knoxville has University of Tennessee there. So, and what kind of wanted something that, they were like, oh, we missed the seasons, a lot of it was around weather and sort of just the climate and then about us growing up, me and my brother. I lived with my brother, and then we ended up in Tennessee. Got
it. Where was your favorite place?
Oh man, West Texas, actually. I was from this age in my life where, speaking of community, it was where I felt the most sort of in tune with the neighborhood that I lived in. Those wide streets, kind of, ride your bike to school with your friends sort of deal, very small, kind of small town, quiet. And for that time of my life, it was the perfect way to sort of, spend a lot of time playing basketball out in the yard, or, just running around with neighborhood kids and things like that, and that sort of changed as I got older. But that was probably, for that age, 7 to 11, roughly, was such a huge thing for me.
Of course. No, it makes a lot of sense. Siblings? I think you talked about this. Older, younger?
Yeah, I'm the youngest of 6 total. So 1 full brother and then 4 half siblings. So my parents had been married previously, obviously.
Got it.
And now my parents are still together, and then just me and my brother Evan, who I live with actually in Cambridge, Massachusetts now.
Oh, right on. Is he involved in the business?
No, he actually has his own business. He's a climate scientist by trade. So he runs like a data analytics company that measures climate risk and sort of attaches that to very technical, but like the municipal bond market for right now.
Super
And
interesting.
sort of basically just layering climate risk onto like pricing different commodities,
That
essentially.
is super interesting. That's
Yeah.
super interesting. But you guys are both detailed oriented. You can tell. I'm curious. So you moved around a lot, and obviously, like I find your background incredibly interesting. And I gotta be honest. Like, one of the first things I wanted to touch on was like, how does an English major, Poli-Sci minor, you have a master's in creative writing and poetry, you indulged in a second master's in clinical mental health and counseling, like. It's all very communication based,
Yep.
but I'm really curious, like how does a English major, Poli-Sci, creative writing focus end up in the world of machine learning?
That's a great question, and not something I would have ever predicted for myself. I think the thread, you mentioned communication. I think the thread that goes through that is that sense of communication and community. I mean, community is part of a huge thing of what I do. In grad school for creative writing, we had a lot of writing workshops, other kinds of ways of building community around the craft we were partaking in, and the same thing with the mental health, the graduate degree I did some coursework in as well. You're investing yourself in the communities of for me, it was adolescent kids I was working with mostly on a mental health level. You're investing in those communities as well, in that as well. So, I have this sort of background of finding different ways to form community around creative pursuits, around wellness pursuits. And so, when I moved up to Boston, I sort of knew I was good at words and good at talking, but like part of it is, the creative writing degree is sort of, you're either going to teach it or you're going to find something else that you can do. And, a lot of folks from that era went into sort of the content marketing space. And my niche was within that is in this sort of building a developer community for machine learning. So I had no experience coding. I'd never touched code before. I didn't know, I could basically be like, tell you the buzzwords about what AI and machine learning were, but had no real sense of it. And sort of, the way things happen sometimes, a little bit of nepotism. It was someone my brother knew in his network, but sort of just hit the ground running with that, and just was tasked with building this developer community that was sort of focused on, the technology space that we were in. And then it's been history ever since.
The communication side, because the thing, so are you essentially their CMO? Like you're in charge. Like, I know it's not. I wanted to ask because I'm actually curious on what the line is, because I did a lot of the research and it's heavy on content. I don't want to say it's thought leadership, because thought leadership in my mind speaks above the community, right? Mm-hmm. It's company perspective relative to top line ideas. And then the community is beneath, in my thought leadership. You guys provide content in an essence that feeds the community directly, as opposed to a biz dev. It's really like, here's the oxygen through insights, information, strategies, and different perspectives. Sure. And then you accumulate, you pull it together. Like, so I guess for me, like, what is head of community in your mind? What does that mean?
So for me, it's essentially our main hub of our community. And because it is a global, mostly online community, we just don't have the capacity to necessarily do in-person events. And obviously, with COVID and everything, right. It is our publication. It's a blog essentially, but we sort of treat it as a publication with that sort of, respect and attention. And so we basically built that from the ground up, and it's contributor led. So it's global. I couldn't count the number of countries. It's probably in the 20s of countries that we have representation from. So all over the world, all different skill levels, from PhDs to students to, CEO level, contributor led. And so we've just sort of built that from the ground up. I mean, it was a lot of boots on the ground, just like defining a value system for our community, the openness, the sort of attaching it and detaching it from our bigger parent brand, Fritz Ai, and then doing boots on the ground, like outreach, just finding people who are writing in the space that we want, finding the folks who are writing in ways that we want to feature, and giving them a new platform. What's unique about our community is the tech space. It's the combination of the mobile side and machine learning. So there's a niche within kind of this bigger tech space that we were able to sort of find folks to speak on. So it is the ground floor through which we build all of our sort of understanding of content, and what, then what does sort of down the road drive that business value. Not every post from our community is directly linked to our business, and we want to keep it that way. We want to keep those associations. We want people to write about what they're passionate about in this larger technical space. And then sort of, there's, you build an identity around that. And then we have folks now who have been working with us for all like 2.5 years, who, one guy's written 2 ebooks, based on the posts he's written in Heartbeat. He's, started doing data science courses, and now, he's ready to go. And we, when we're like, hey, this is a piece of content we need, he's right there, and we're working in partnership, and it's a true partnership where we're each valuing each other, and sort of have built that over time. And so it's a lot about trust, and it's a lot about that, like that foundation from the beginning.
Got it. I got a number of questions I want to unpack, but for those, and just so you know, and for those listening, you guys know I take notes throughout, because I do this selfishly to learn. Like, machine learning matters. And I think people need to understand that machine learning is not this esoteric thing that smart people, this thing is a fundamental tool and a way that will impact how we operate as humans forever. Right. So, but for me, I'm not that informed on it. And so I'm going to be jotting things down as I go. And I hope you guys listen and are able to jot down and learn and apply, whether you're in the technical side of it in a development ecosystem, or you're just curious what's happening in the world around you as a consumer. For those that don't know, what is Fritz Ai? Just starting from a high level.
So Fritz Ai is a SaaS company. So we are a software as a service. So we are a developer platform. So we have other software engineers come onto our platform. Basically, they can come in and build computer vision models, which are, basically algorithms, statistical models that teach machines how to see things. So it might be, I might hold up a banana in front of a camera, and the computer vision system, the machine learning model, will correctly predict that this is a banana, for instance. That's a very simple use case for that. So what Fritz is doing specifically is there are a number of different concerns when you want to put those models onto a mobile phone. So the newest in flagship mobile phones, they have these like processors that can handle these models, the size of them, the speed of them, basically providing on-device experiences that make your phone more powerful. So if you think of something like, you're typing on your keyboard and you get predictions of like what word you're predicting you're going to type next. That's a machine learning model happening on your phone. So it powers these experiences that either make things more efficient. They provide a bit of expertise. So one example of this is like, we work with a company that basically detects skin lesions and then connects you with a dermatologist based on the nature of those skin lesions that the computer vision model scans and says, oh, this is acne. Here's a customized treatment for you. So it sort of takes that expertise where you need to go out and find a dermatologist and puts that expertise in the palm of your hand and wider access to those things. There are a bunch of things I could talk about in terms of the benefits of on-device AI versus sort of more traditional AI and machine learning, but that's the essence of it, is that we're trying to, give developers a way to build these machine learning models that will allow them to create mobile app experiences that are transformative. You think of things like Snapchat or TikTok or these sort of content creation platforms that allow you to do all these crazy filters on your face. The building block of those experiences are machine learning models. They map your face. They create a mesh of your face. They have object tracking, things like that. So that's what we're trying to do, is trying to make that process easier, more accessible, because it is hard. Machine learning is this esoteric thing where you're like, that sounds really complicated. It's a lot of math. We're trying to abstract a lot of that at Fritz Ai and make it so that someone like me, who's never coded before, can build, test, and, not necessarily build a full project, but sort of access this technology and democratize it, to places where it might be too expensive for folks to access, or it might be too complicated. We're really trying to strip that down and put it into people's hands.
That last piece is really interesting. The democratization of complex ideas. Complex technological ideas. that is because you're right. There's a barrier to entry to complexity when there appears to be a how do I word this? A knowledge gap and a skill set gap,
Absolutely.
right? Because the thing is, I think, and this conversation has become more and more apparent as the current state of COVID has reduced the enrollments in school, secondary schooling. MBA programs, I think, dropped 21% from an international to U.S. MBA candidates, I think, since COVID, which is a massive decline, right? So, but a lot of executives in Fortune 500s and the Elon Musks and the Microsoft, they're starting to come off and say, look, access to information is limitless. It's just the will to go learn. But there's an intimidation factor with things like machine learning, AI, and complex systems, because the question, where do I start, comes into play, right? It's one of those functions of building the biggest building in town, but knowing that it does start with putting a brick down, no matter how you shape it. And so you guys are building a platform that allows really anybody on any level to at least start to interact with machine learning and a capability where they create a more intelligent, autonomous computer interface predicated on whatever that core thing's supposed to be doing, whether it's, assessments from a medical standpoint or content creation.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Absolutely.
Super, super interesting. And so let's take a step back then, right? Because that's an idea that when I look at your background, Austin, you went from school and then quickly came into Fritz, right? So was machine learning, AI, and these types of concepts of interest and something you sought out? Because building community is a really, really difficult thing to do. Just I don't care if it's a podcast audience, if it's a blog audience, the retention of attention is a challenging thing. And you guys have done a really nice job. You have so much content. It's so much valuable content. It's not bullshit, right? You're not just, oh shit, what's going on IG today? Like what's going on, your blog is rich with quality information. I'm curious, how did you land at Fritz? Did you seek out the company, or was it relationships? Because I can't see that being an easy thing to build without an innate interest in the topic.
Yeah, it was incidental. I was not at all interested in AI. My brother is a data scientist by trade, so I had some sort of, those fields are related. So data science is sort of the foundational math that underpins machine learning, which is like a different iteration of the same field, essentially. There's a lot more to say, obviously, on that. But no, I didn't. I kind of came into this just by happenstance, I think that the thing that's been the most difficult about that too is that having to learn, and it comes back to this idea of community, is I'm not a developer, and we're ostensibly marketing to developers in a broad business sense. And so part of that is like learning the developer audience and building a community of developers, of which I don't know how they talk. I don't know
vernacular, right?
They're having vernacular. I don't know I had to really just spend a lot of time reading the submissions, reading articles, reading other articles on other publications when we were getting started, just to understand. Because I don't want to come to these people and send them a form email and it sounds like I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. So there's a lot of initial building of my own, just from the ground up knowledge in terms of like, how do people talk about this? Like what kind of language do they use? There's also the global element of like sort of the multicultural competency of like understanding that different people respond differently, and, learning how not to take those things personally and then build those relationships maybe a little more slowly than you might, down south in Tennessee, where everyone's having a good old time and is happy and is like, well, how you doing? Has that sort of more affable, friendly. So it's just like you have to reorient your mind to a different group of people. And I think my lack of understanding of machine learning and AI made that a particular challenge.
No, of course. It's a complicated thing to approach. And one of the pieces that I find so interesting is, and I'll preface this, don't fact check me. This is my perspective. It is not something I've read, but I find it common with folks that are incredibly technologically capable, communication skills are often the more challenging skill set to adopt.
Yeah.
So building a community that is designed to be communicated and fostered around a community of people that are not as capable of communicating effectively, that in itself is an odd variable, right? Like, because they're so damn smart in what they're doing, but how do they project that outward, right? Yeah. And so you put out I want to touch on one thing. So you put out a Medium article back in like 2018. I don't even know if you remember this, but there's something that I saw that really caught my attention. And you said more or less, you've always thought community was something that forms largely by happenstance, where people are involved and connected through discrete and clear purposes, socialization, relaxing after work, meeting new people. And you go on to talk about sustaining and growing community over time. Like, you've learned it takes quite more effort than hanging streamers and making the punch bowl, right? But I kind of appreciated that, because it's not about the carrot and the stick, but it's about getting people to come is more than what the incentive is. There has to be something richer than the treat at the end of the walk. And so with that being where your head was at in 2018 and thinking about this is going to be a lot more than just giving them something interesting to poke at, how do you feel it's developed from there?
Yeah, I think I've been able to sort of use, you were asking this question and I was thinking about, so when I was in my creative writing program, I actually got to teach writing for a number of years. That was just like part of the deal. You got like a stipend, you taught like English 101, 102, so foundational sort of rhetorical structure, like writing structure. And so one of the things I've been able to offer is a sort of nurturing relationship to folks and helping them become better at what they're writing. And I think, you're not going to capture everyone like that. We have one-offs, folks who come in, want, to publish something, it's very discreet, it's one-off, but we have several people now. We have a solid group of folks who I've just seen their progress their writing has become so much more rich, so much more structurally sound. And I think there was a deep patience I had to have with that. It wasn't checking, drafts off a list. It was really digging in and leaving a comment on the draft that's like, I think, structurally this isn't working, and X, Y, and Z, and sort of using this background I had in teaching, and sort of, so you're providing, and through teaching you form relationships and, in trust. And if I were just checking drafts off a list and just doing small copy edits and not looping in the writers and making them a part of the process, and a lot of blogs do that, where your post will be live when it's live, and we'll maybe tell you, maybe not, you might see it. I want to be in constant contact with folks and let them know every step of the way what's happening. Easier said than done all the time, but basically, I think those few things is like the constant communication, the patience, and then the sort of skills I learned teaching around, adding that into the mix of like, you're getting help from someone who like cares about you and your work. And I think like over time that makes a difference for people, and they might not see it right away, but over time, now I have conversations with folks who are in our community who are in our product, in Fritz Ai's product, playing around and giving me product feedback. And we're good friends. I had someone who bought my poetry book and sent me a journal from Pakistan. And there's just some amazing relationships I've made just by that kindness of offering that expertise in a patient and, conscious way. And I think that's been huge for me.
It makes a lot of sense. You're treating contributors as employees and investing in their development, which in an environment where contractors are really almost thrown to the wayside as a commodity, it differentiates the entire approach. Let's start. I want to talk about the early stages. Did you guys get funding immediately? Like, what was? I'm curious, just from a front end standpoint. 2.5, 3 years ago, when you guys really got up and running. Mm-hmm. Did you guys immediately pitch ideas, get funding, put some infrastructure in place, and then start community? Like, because it's kind of the chicken or the egg. Build the community before the product, have a product. Like, what was that like?
They were kind of side by side. So I came on board, I would say 3 or 4 months after the initial fundraise. Don't quote, you are quoting me, so I'm going to be recorded on that. But
no, you're
not sure exactly when that was. It was in mid-late 2017. I came on very late 2017, early 2018. So we knew, and I was fortunate enough to have this buy-in from our co-founders, that they knew they wanted to build a community from the beginning. And it was built into the roadmap. So, we definitely had an MVP of our product and sort of our core initial idea of what we wanted to do with that. But right alongside that, we were building community. So we were populating, our blog with our own sort of internal content. And my task when I came along was like, all right, go figure this out. Go find people to write these articles, craft the outreach messages, understand their concerns and what, learn this technical space. And so it was, a lot of software companies, I think, kind of come to community and marketing stuff later. They think we'll build the product, then we'll find the correct paid channel and we'll just dump a bunch of money into it. And that can work for some businesses, especially if there's a very, very defined market. But for ours, it was sort of, blue ocean territory. Like nobody was really doing this in the production level, putting real products out besides like the big players like Snapchat, Google, all these kinds of big players. So we knew that, and I was lucky to have this buy-in where I could just really build this and have that freedom, to say, hey, we need to build this developer community and really invest in brand. And that's a part of investing in brand. And that is, like you're talking about, is foundational, because if we didn't have that now that we're trying to do more stuff with our, I'm doing more product marketing as I grow into my role, and more things around traditional marketing funnels and things like that, if your audience is familiar, and to have that backing from this community and to be able to support them, allows us then to go to that community when we're struggling with something, or we need coverage on a topic, and clearly I know who to ask. I have 6-7 names that are, they're part of the Fritz family, and I like to think of them that way, and we all do as a group. So it was, they ran in parallel tracks, and there's always been the backing and the investment, which I know I've talked to other marketers for, like, I gotta always argue ROI. And we were like, we won't know ROI for a couple of years on this, because there's you're not gonna, your first a year of blog posts, you're not gonna be able to exactly track what leads to revenue, right? And that takes a lot of faith. And I appreciate that our co-founders gave me that faith and gave the faith to our developer community to sort of like keep building that. And now it's starting to come to fruition, 2.5, 3 years later.
It's incredible. There's a difference between branding and marketing.
Yes.
Branding is the connectivity between the brand and the people. Marketing is what gets the people to buy from you.
Like the tactical thing that moves people down the funnel.
Right. Marketing creates demand so you can capitalize on the demand. Brand is them not needing for you to sell them, because they understand what you stand for and what you do.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we got tagged. It's just like you see these things start to happen over time, like someone was writing a sort of industry report on edge AI, which is basically like edge devices. So mobile phones would be a part of that. So like the intersection there. And I saw this tweet, and he was just like, I'm writing this industry report. And then someone, is like, any cool companies that I should know of. And someone I don't even know, but is like, oh, in our broader ecosystem, our community tagged us in it. And so, there's something to that, where like, even people I don't know have come across our brand, whether it's through content or whether it's through, our consistency with like newsletters, or with, all kinds of content efforts, and just consistently building that into what we do. And
it allows you to bridge the gap between guessing and knowing. The truth is that the hardest thing is people spend so much time developing a product that they don't actually know if there's a product market fit.
Yeah.
Because they spent so much damn time in the basement building something from scratch, but they never talk to their customer. You guys are doing both. Your community is market research and branding at the same time.
It is, yeah. And for just
brilliant.
Thank you. For a bit of context there, I mean, we started Fritz AI right alongside when Apple and Google, sort of the two biggest players in the space, released their capabilities for this technology. So very, very, very new. And so that more traditional process of like talking to customers or users was a little bit more difficult. It was blue ocean. Like we just didn't have those folks. So the way we sort of found that signal was through building these relationships on the ground with like mobile developers or machine learning engineers or product managers who were working on these kinds of products, and not selling them a product right away, but slowly building relationships and trust with them, so that when this market does start to mature, who are you going to call,
well, that's, I mean, you're probably so deep in Reddit and so many other communities, right? But that's about getting involved. Like when we work with clients, and we've talked about this, like, the agency I'll run, like we do a variety of things, but one of the things we start doing is when people work with us on a retainer, like we hire people, we have our staff, the whole job for that employee, that person, is being logged in as that company on all of their major accounts, engaging in the community. They're not posting, they are commenting, engaging as a member. That's it, because you need to show you can listen as much as you can talk.
Absolutely.
And so, but when you say boots on the ground, that's what I think about. I think about you spending time messaging on people, commenting, hey, this is a really interesting perspective because of this. And it's not a bullshit insight. It's not like a like and be like, cool post, bro. It's like you're actually processing and giving them genuine feedback, because I think a lot of people forget that if you were in a room with somebody and they gave a 20-minute keynote, you came up and said, hey, really like that. That was cool. And then you just stared at them, they would not think of you as something other than just checking the box. But if you show up and you say, hey, Austin, that was a really interesting perspective on this thing, and I like your approach here, you start a dialogue. But people forget that when in digital, like that's all it's the same thing.
Yeah.
When you leave a really thoughtful comment and you show that you actually consumed what they put so much time and attention into, that's where you build. So let me actually say, beyond my rant there, like, is that what you were really spending a lot of time doing in the early stages of getting involved?
Yeah, I mean, we've built it now, I think, to where it's sort of an engine where we don't have to do as much of that. You know, and I think
it's self
you wouldn't want someone for 3 years be working on just that sort of approach, but it did very much help with that. And I think, you know, that's something I very much also value in my personal life. You know, when I want to compliment someone, or I try to do it in an observational way that is deep to, you know, what I see in that person. And I think the same can be said for a piece of content, or if someone has a question that they post on Twitter that I have a resource for, you know, I want to contextualize everything. Like, that's just how my brain works. And I think like that has really served me well in building this community, because it allows me to be, it's sort of a detail oriented, but it's also in that observation. And I think it stems from my personal, very interested in people and the sort of very particular parts of their personalities. And I like to talk about those things with them. And I think that just extends into the work. I think that extends into my interactions. You know, I spent a lot of time writing like really personal and like heartfelt emails at first to try to get the people we wanted to write for us. And it wasn't disingenuous. It's just, you know, it was just,
you can want something and be authentic at the same time. That's the hard. People feel like because you're asking it doesn't mean you're not giving. You can ask for things, but the way you do it is everything, right? You know, and it's really interesting. So I'm curious, right? So there's a lot of companies, and running in marketing and did a full service agency all the time. I'll talk to people and they cannot distinguish the branding long-term marathon. It's not an ROI quantitative conversation relative to return on ad spend with Facebook ads, right? Different conversations. You're 2.5, 3 years into building community, something that for most partners, to your point of view and at large, a lot of founders have a really tough time investing in that part of the business because it's going to give you zero return for a little while. What would you say to somebody that runs a company that's early stage tech, SaaS, similar game, and is apprehensive because they feel like it's just going to suck the money out of their fundraising, like, or maybe they're going in to raise money and they want to say, this is why we need, like they're going to VC saying, we need $500,000 to build community, develop product, hire engineers. They're nervous because they think that the community devalues their ask. Like, how would you help them overcome that?
I think you need to kind of go through a process where you understand, and I don't think every business needs to start with a developer community. I think in a lot of businesses that can come alongside. There are certain industries where the problem is more defined, the solutions are more defined, and you're trying to frame up an MVP very quickly and start getting user acquisition. So it might not be, you know, you might build community on the back end of that once you acquire a bunch of users and build a user community. So I think the important thing is sort of working through a process where you actually map out why you want to start a developer community or a user community or a whatever form of community, you know, that makes sense for your business. I think you have to have a plan and how it's going to mature over time. You know, we have, you know, hasn't necessarily turned out this way because of a number of reasons, but, you know, we had an early roadmap where we wanted to invest in community to the point where, you know, someday, and I still think this is possible, where we could have sort of like live events that focus on this very particular technology and have that user base. So I think there's a couple of things. I think you need to define the sort of the why questions, and then you need to have a roadmap that aligns with your product roadmap, and understand how to communicate about, like, you know, if you invest in community early on, you can leverage that community to then help your product enter a new sort of era, or that next phase that you need to get to.
Yeah, they're non-equity partners at the end of the day. A good quality community is a micro partner that has no financial investment in the business, right? Yes. They want you to win. They value your input. They're willing to engage with you so that what you put out creates a dialogue. It doesn't end the conversation. And they're inclined to give you authentic feedback. So when shit doesn't work and you need real honest feedback, you can go to your community and they're not going to break, right? Like, it's no different than a new company. Like, if you're a new business and you're working with somebody, there's going to be growing pains. It's not because the relationship may not be there, but because you're a young company. Even if you're 3 years in, implementing a new partnership, acting on a new deliverable, it's not about having core competencies and skill sets. It's having the appetite to navigate anything short of perfection. Good community is the insurance policy against that adversity, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you define a success with the community? At this point, is it you can jump right in.
I was going to just add one thing to the last
thing.
Yeah,
please jump on in.
Thinking, there's the external benefit where it contributes to a roadmap, it contributes to this sort of brand, it contributes to all these things. But I also think there's an internal cultural thing that's happened at Fritz where it's taught us to consider business questions, with a, and it's broader marketing, but sort of a community and marketing focus to the big questions. And it's not a tag along. It's not a thing you tack on like, oh yeah, we need to like announce that product feature. It's like from the moment we're developing a product feature, we look at it in terms of, obviously engineering and product roadmap, but we also look at it in terms of like, okay, how does this impact our community? How do we communicate it to our different email lists and community? And then how can we leverage the community to help us build that and help us share that with people in a way that's genuine and reflects the sort of value system we built. So it is a internal value system as well. So then what makes a successful community? I think there is that, then the internal culture piece, I think is part of it. And then the external piece is that, again, I think, you have to, I think it helps you build your brand in the way that you want. So it helps you build a value system around your brand and not be this sort of amoral or agnostic sort of player. It also, I think, we're starting to see it now. I mean, I can't give you any numbers or anything. We're starting to see the ROI now. It is a long play at ROI. And if you can have that patience and if you believe in your product and you believe in your market, there are ways to, it makes the downstream marketing so much easier. I'll put it that way. It makes marketing now, product marketing and all the different things we do just so much easier because we spent all that time building playbooks, building how we share content, what sort of channels we use, how we use them, the brand voice, because if you're constantly sharing content and speaking with these stakeholders, not shareholders, stakeholders, then you sort of build that voice. So then when it comes time to like pitch your product, you're not yelling into the void. You have a built up audience. And even if not all of them are going to convert, you're getting much more volume and you're getting much more visibility, and your chances of, getting that post trending on Hacker News or Reddit or whatever are much higher because you have this built-in sort of network effects as well. So it sort of builds network effects, I think. So I think it's kind of there's a few different threads in there, I think, but that's how I think of it.
Interesting. What's the investment? Are you involved at all on the VC side of the house? I'm curious.
No, I'm not in the biz dev. I do a little bit of market research here and there and things, but I don't do much with VCs. No.
You're good. I'm always curious how people that are very finance focused perceive abstract concepts like community, right? Yeah. But that we can indulge in. So when you're developing the community, it's content focused, right? Just so we can get down to the micro components of it. It's content focused. So the Heartbeat, which is the name of the blog, or the publication, excuse me.
Yeah, no, right? That's okay.
No, but there's a distinction, right? I do think that there's a little more integrity behind it. Dovetailing off the concept of integrity, do you feel that at this point being featured as a Fritz, as a Heartbeat published piece is a stamp of approval on the end of the contributor? Do you feel that there's a level of credibility that comes with that publication relative to just putting it out on their own?
I believe so. One is because we work through a pretty intensive editorial process. We work through a design process. So there's an aesthetic quality to it. So there's some sort of consistency there that we sort of ensure. There's also, the proof is sort of in the pudding with this too. I mean, I've had, I've had numerous folks ask me for letters of recommendation where they want to talk about our work together and the publications together, and have used it as springboards to, either enter degree programs or try to get jobs, and sort of use that on their resume. And I think, when whoever's reviewing those resumes clicks over and sees they're not seeing just a blogger.com like kind of janky looking thing. They're seeing something that's professional quality, that's attached to a real brand and a real company that has a legit, that has legit traction. And I think all of those pieces, they might matter in degrees, but I think they all matter. And and it gives them a relationship to rely on. You know, I love supporting my contributors, whether it's, you know, helping them edit their ebooks or writing them those letters of recommendation. So it also gives them a foothold. And frankly, I don't know the, you know, I want to put a value statement behind this, but a lot of our folks, like I said, are not non-US, you know, and to be associated in that kind of way with a US startup that's venture backed, that is in a major metropolitan area, that has some weight to it as well. You know, you can say you're a contract or a contributing writer for this official publication in a company in the US. And for some folks in you know, up and coming parts of the world, you know, certain different countries, like that's a huge deal, you know, like that's nothing to laugh at. And we have the chops to back that up in terms of our technical team and sort of our editorial like chops and the process that we go through and the legitimacy of it. So yeah, I think all those pieces sort of come together and are valuable.
It's impressive, man. It's really, really impressive. So are you on a, from a community standpoint, like where do you see it going? Obviously live events is a component of it, but in the interim with COVID and everything and it being such a virtual and a global play, what do you see the development of the community and your focus looking like over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing we want to focus on, you know, now that we have this sort of engine, we have a little bit more time to, and a little bit more flexibility around like, you know, the kinds of content we work with. You know, at first it's just like, you're just trying to get people in the door, and there's a certain volume play you make to sort of, you know, then it sort of winnows down. Yeah, I think the next steps are more diversity in our writers. It's a male dominated field, you know, so we're trying to find pathways to that. One of those is through a new product, part of our product that's connected to Snapchat actually. And there's just like a lot of creative artists who build these filters, lenses they're called, in Snapchat. And we have a tool that allows now these folks to build machine learning models that they can use when they're creating these lenses. And I think that community is much more diverse just generally in terms of their age range, their backgrounds, their gender, like all the sort of demographics. Like we're definitely looking to kind of reach outside our comfort zone in terms of diversity and to offer just a varied assortment of content that features that diversity in terms of longer form interviews, thinking about working with video content, you know, in some way or another, whether it's featuring video tutorials or helping folks build their video brand, so to speak, contributors. So we're thinking about different content types and then also like who's behind that content. And I think for right now, that's sort of our main focus. And then eventually down the road, looking into things like, okay, if we're in this space and we're the preeminent name, then you start thinking about live, like spinning that into live events, develop conferences, federated networks of meetups around the world, you know, like those kinds of things. It's a bit of a ways off, but I think you just keep building each piece of that puzzle, or like putting each piece of that puzzle together, and you end up with something where you can kind of scale it in different ways.
Yeah, and it allows your again, it's the same way I look at building a podcast audience. So we talked about this on our first call. I look at it like if everything I did failed, the agency had to close it, I lost my job, everything failed, but you have a community, that's almost more valuable than my mind than a 401k, right? You know, like in the sense of the insurance policy against the unknown, if you have a community of people that love, trust, respect, and admire what you're doing, then you have the ability to make a lot of progress in a short amount of time relative to your immediate resources of capital and time. And so if your product needs to pivot, but you have community, it's the insurance policy against the pivot. It's like, they're still with us if we change, you know? And so I actually like that as a pitch relative to working with investors, you know? It's like, look, at the end of the day, we have this community here. So no matter what we're doing.
Domain authority, we've got all the things that go along with that, right? SEO, ranking, like we just, our shit goes a lot of times like straight towards the top, you know, it works out that. That was just one example, but you're right. A lot of things like that.
It de-risks the entire deal because it's like, look, we have two products, community and our actual platform.
Absolutely.
Super interesting, man. What's been the most challenging part of it? And I probably segmented it into two things. One is having the community, like starting from nothing. And then what was the first plateau you hit of success? And then it was like, damn, this is either slowing down or you had to shift the strategy. I'd love to understand those two sides.
So the biggest two of the biggest challenges early, one was, of course, for personally learning the language and sort of like we talked about earlier, sort of learning that world, learning that language, how they speak, how developers speak. And the second part was getting to a point, and I remember having multiple conversations about my frustration, and then I just told, like, be patient, it's going to get there. We've done our due diligence. This will take 18 months to 2 years. We're basically getting to the point where I don't have to go out every week and like headhunt essentially and go find new writers and new content, that we have this stable of excellent contributors who are stoked about writing for us, who ask for our input about topics, who write about our product, all those kinds of things. So getting to that point was very difficult. And then sort of moving into where we're at now is the hardest part, I think, is in a way that's deft and it feels genuine and it feels real, is shifting into this area where we're now saying, okay, like we're pulling back a little bit on how much content we're publishing just by the nature of kind of some strategy decisions. But one of those things being, okay, we want folks to write more about our product now specifically. And so figuring out that transition has been difficult while we're also doing a lot of the product marketing stuff that a maturing company does, right? So I think that's been really challenging, is to do that in a way that feels genuine and isn't like, okay, now we're shifting into this marketing thing. Like, no, it's still community, but we want to encourage you. We think our product is at a point where it provides enough value that there's substantial like content to be had there. And we want to encourage you to do that and to challenge yourself and sort of reach outside of what we've done traditionally. So that's been interesting to try to communicate that with folks and to try to kind of bring them along into that new strategy. And I think so far we're doing pretty well, but there's still, I think bringing in that more the diversity and more sort of varied content will help with that as well.
Yeah, it's one of those functions of you want to build community, but you don't want to build an echo chamber.
Exactly.
Where everything's just repeating and it's affirmation centric. It's everything's yes, this, yes, yes, yes. I'm curious, do you guys pay your contributors? Like, is there any monetary gain for them?
We do. Yeah, we do.
It varies, I'm sure.
What's that?
I'm sure it varies. I was more curious on like the what's in it for them component, because, like, for example, I got a buddy that, if he's listening to this, he has a blog, he writes, and it literally is designed to make complex ideas simple, and he tries to keep it 500 words, and it would be 500 words, machine learning in 500 words, or this economic thing. And but it's one of those things where I think there's an appetite for dialogue. There's an appetite for the conversation around these types of things.
Yeah.
But you're right, the diversity, where the making sure there's different ideas and there's a diversity of perspectives, so that it's not just rinse and repeat, but shifting through. So I'm curious, because you're basically like, when you look at the customer of the community, they're not buying, but your target people, they're writers, they're contributors, and who else?
Well, a lot of them are developers. So that's the issue. That's the thing, right? Is most of our contributors are developers. So that's sort of where you got back to that point about like teaching, like helping teach them how to communicate more effectively, how to say, okay, before you jump into this process, you have to give some context first, and sort of like helping them build that skill set. So, we're paying them because we believe it's work. And you're contributing to the success of a company. I think, if you have the capacity to pay people for content, I think it's bullshit if you don't.
I love you. Yes.
It is work, and it is, we are benefiting from your voice, and, it's not a king's ransom, but I think it is a gesture, and a gesture of goodwill. And as far as I'm concerned, we'll always do that. We'll always pay for contributor work. It might change what kind of contributor work we accept and work with, but we always do that.
It also gives you the permission to have a very strong due diligence process and have a standard, right? If you don't pay people, but you have a design standard of writing concept, or not a design standard, what was the note I took down? It was, just the editing process. You were saying, you're just an asshole if you have a really strict process, but then it's like, well, I'm doing free work for you and you're beating me up over the details. Relative to now, it's like, hey, we'll pay you and we'll invest in your development. Yep. And then it's a good two-way street.
It does have flexibility when we need to slow things down, or maybe some days we have internal content and we need to, bump someone to a couple days. Like there's that common understanding of that. We're here for you, but there's also this, there is that reality too. So it gives us some flexibility, and it allows them a framework to understand our relationship as well.
How much of the content is contextual to the timeline it was published, relative to like it just being it's something that can be looked at and valued 2 years after it was published?
It's a mix. I would say it's mostly sort of evergreen content where you're working with tools that and tutorial, a lot of like technical tutorials that using certain processes that maybe shift a little bit or different versions of a piece of software or slightly different, something here or there, but things that sort of are broadly appealing. And then to the like search terms we want or keywords we want. And then there's, I would say maybe 15% of it is a little bit more timely. So we cover like Apple's events usually where they release a new phone or a new iOS or Google event, or so mostly things around industry related events. And sometimes I'll do like little case studies or something like that about a product or a mobile app that, you know, is using machine learning or something like that. But I would say it's close to that, like maybe 80-20 split.
Have you considered reviewing the data of the top 10, 20 pieces and then creating video content on that and creating a library based on the top things people are paying attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were going to invest in that, my sense would be we would want to do that, experiment with that on the Fritz side first. So we're starting to kind of dip into video, like video tutorial type of stuff. We want to see how that sort of performs with stuff that's closer to our business, just because we don't necessarily have a process and a workflow for converting those things into video. And we're not sure that our top performing articles sometimes are a little bit separate from like our actual products. So it might be like, here's this sort of like core data science article that is like foundational information if you're just learning data science and machine learning. We want those folks in our community too. We want them to know that, you know, we value this, the foundation that you have to build to get to the point where you can build the same thing for mobile, you know, for a mobile app or whatever. So, but no, we haven't dipped into that yet. Just it's partly because of sort of constraints of just the early stage lean startup type of deal. But that's an interesting idea, and I write it down.
No, I think de-risking the process of creating content, you know, like that's why with the podcast, like I'll take a long version, but then when I chop it up into 20 pieces, you know, I think like Mehdi, who is the chief investment officer I just interviewed, like I sent him a zip file with 29 pieces of content because it was, you know, and we'll see what we can repurpose from this, obviously. But it was, you know, you get 12 videos and then you format them for IGTV, then, you know, Facebook and whatever. And you start to see, and it gives you a lot of metadata to understand. Not metadata, that's not the right term, but you're like, oh, that one video, like when I interviewed, you know, that one thing took off, and then it's like, all right, that kind of feeds the rest of it, right? It's the same thing when companies run ads, they over-index on one piece of creative, whereas cut the budget in half, target the same audience with 2 pieces of creative. It's not about A/B testing, it's about like, what are they responding to? Right. And you know, so I just think, because you guys have a lot of content where it's really an anthology of information more than it is just a news piece. Right. What are you, so as somebody, I'm curious on this as we kind of tie up loose ends here. Somebody that's not like you and I, we don't, I'm not a programmer. I've never written a line of code. So in the line of machine learning and what that is, to people, you and I, and probably the people listening that may not know or have any development experience, what's something about machine learning that you're curious about as a adjacent citizen and not an active developer utilizing it on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, when I think about this, I do think of the problems with it. I think about bias in modeling, right? Like the sort of idea that like, well, it's a computer system. It obviously is just spitting out the correct information. You know, an AI model, a computer vision model or machine learning model is going to be reflective of the data that it trains on. And if that data is biased, if it's racist, if it's sexist, if it's not featuring, you know, a diverse range of faces, if it's facial recognition technology or these sorts of things like that sort of end up in surveillance systems, I'm very wary of, because a machine learning engineer and a machine learning engineering team has a very particular makeup of like who they are and their biases and their life experiences, statistically speaking. So things like that really, really grate at me. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I think is like making the positive is sort of like making these experiences, you know, whether it's on mobile or any other kind of software, just so much more seamless. The best machine learning is hidden from the user. You don't know what's happening. You know something cool is happening, but you don't know that it's not screaming at you. It's machine learning. So on the one hand, you have this sort of concern about like the generalization of models and how they work on like diverse populations that I'm worried about. And then on the other end, I'm like, wow, but if you get this right, you can really power some seamless, amazing experiences that create better working conditions for people, that augment, you know, entertainment, that enhance gaming, that all these sorts of things that culturally we are cornerstones of our culture can just, it's like adding a little bit of spice to them and a little bit of expertise or a little bit of just like that I don't want to say magic, but just that little like, ooh, that's different. Like that's a little sleek, different. And I think, my wanderings, my mental wanderings are somewhere in that spectrum.
I think time will tell, right? To your point, computers are only as ethical as their builder.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and so as long as there's differing opinions, there's going to be the architect who's building it's going to have a perspective on what it wants it to be capable of doing. But absolutely, without any bias at all, it's going to be a thing that matters. And absolutely, at the end of the day, I think if as we kind of sign off here, like, Austin, thank you for spending some time. Machine learning is really interesting, right? It's something that it does matter. It's something that most people, just like Bitcoin, people like, I hear about it, but I don't know how to conceptualize the tangible thing that it is. And to your point, oftentimes the average consumer can't distinguish what is and what is not machine learning. They just see the filter. And so I love the idea of the democratization of complex technological ideas through collaboration. I really think that's super interesting. And a couple of things that I took down. So for those that are thinking about building community, right? One, value the contribution of those you're leaning on to build a community, whether it's compensation or it's investing in their development. You guys do both, but I think that's important. Everybody wants free, cheap labor, but if they're giving you something that's truly valuable, then value that contribution. Have a process so that people understand how they fit into the bigger picture. If it's an editing process, a design process, when people feel like they're a part of something that is naturally happening, then it makes them feel like they're in the right place relative to this doesn't feel like they know what they're doing. Have a process that's defined. Have a roadmap and expectations for where you want the community to go so that you have the parameters of what success looks like. But also don't be so stubborn that you aren't flexible enough to pivot as you develop the process or you develop the community.
Right.
Right. I think one thing that you shared a lot and maybe didn't say it outright was, be okay listening even though marketing feels like talking.
Yes, right? Absolutely. And learning what you're listening to and what you're hearing, and really internalizing that over time. And you got to be patient with yourself too in that.
Definitely. And be honest about knowing what you know and don't know, right? Like if I pitch a deal in an industry I don't know a lot about, I'm going to tell that customer, hey, I'm not that familiar with this space, this thing. So when we come to telling the story, I want you to know that this is what I'm going to spend my time understanding, because the vernacular matters, the community matters, because at the end of the day, the host of the party has to feel from a guest's perspective like they themselves belong at the party.
Absolutely.
And if it doesn't make sense, then it's not going to last, right? And so super interesting. Austin, anything you want to close out on where people can find you guys and any details relating to Fritz that's top of mind or top of the newsline?
Yeah, Fritz.ai is our website. Heartbeat.fritz.ai is our blog. The thing we're really excited about right now, and I mentioned this, is the Snapchat piece. There's some really cool possibilities there. And for folks who even don't have, we're working with the creators, artists, we're really trying to abstract things out for them, and we're seeing some really cool stuff there. So you should expect some good things from Fritz around building machine learning for Snapchat lenses. So you might even see a Snapchat lens that was built with Fritz AI here in a little bit. Who knows?
Love it. Can't wait. Hey, community at Fritz AI, Austin Kodra, thank you for joining. Everybody, y'all know the deal. My name is Jeremy Francesi. This is First Floor Conversations. The view at the top is only as good as the foundation which preserves it. And when it comes to the world we live in, machine learning will absolutely be a foundational component of the world we live in. And so thank you for providing some insight. Everybody else, stay tuned for more.
Hey everybody, my name is Jeremy Francesi. I'm the founder and president of Strategic Branding Studios, and I want to say thanks so much for stopping by and tuning into the video. If you enjoyed the content, remember to like, comment, and subscribe so you can stay tuned and stay informed on all new releases. If you're interested in learning about how SBS can help you and your organization take marketing and communications to the next level, visit us at strategicbrandingstudios.com for more.